Hang on just a minute. There we go. Now I got a mic on. Hey, that was my third week in a row seeing that intro video. It never gets old. I love being part of a church that's alive and healthy, that's making an impact here in northeastern Pennsylvania. I think one of the greatest privileges of my life is being able to play a part in what God is doing here in this place. Great to have you guys here today. Great to have those of you online joining us today as you watch from coffee shops and living rooms and dorms all over Pennsylvania and beyond. Great to have you guys here. In fact, those of you in the room, let's just welcome everybody watching online during the 11:15 service. This is week number 3 in this teaching series called This Is Us, and what we've done is we've set aside 4 weeks to talk about who we are as a church and why we do what we do and why it really matters. And if you're brand new to the church, this is a great introduction to Parker Hill. If you've been around for a while, this is just a really good refresher. So we built this series on 4 statements that really describe our DNA as a church, 4 statements that really get to the essence of who we are. So by way of review, we began 2 weeks ago, and we talked about this is us, we are on a mission. That we believe if we're going to be the church that God is calling us to be, we've got to be laser focused on the mission that God has given to the church. And we talked about the fact that the church was never intended to be just a comfortable place for religious people to hang out, that the church is called to be a lifeboat in a culture that is sinking. And so if we're going to be on mission, we've got to open our doors and open our arms to people who are hurting and confused and seeking and trying to find the way back to God. And we talked about that 2 weeks ago. Last week, we drilled down into this statement: we are better together. Faith is not a me thing, faith is a we thing. And if we're really going to be the people that God is calling us to be, then we need to surround ourselves with other believers who are on the journey with us. We all need people who can encourage us, who can spur us on toward love and good deeds. And so last week, we spent some time just walking through some opportunities for you to move beyond just an hour on Sunday and into a smaller group where you can build some of those authentic, life-giving relationships, and you can take advantage of that. There was a card on your seat in the room when you came in. We would still encourage you to jump into a group. And so today, week number 3, we're going to talk about this statement: this is us, we are crew members, or to make it a little bit more pointed, we are crew members, not passengers. Now, in order to really help you understand the difference between being a crew member and being a passenger, let me tell you about a trip that Debbie and I took with my parents about 9 years ago. So my parents invited us and a couple of my siblings to go on vacation with them, and my parents covered all the expenses. They watch online, so thanks again, Mom and Dad, for that vacation. This was our accommodations. We were on this cruise ship for 7 days, the Pride of America. I just believe that it's really important to be there for your parents when they need you, so I went along on the cruise. This is a picture of me loving life on the cruise ship. Now, this was a cruise to Hawaii, so over the 7 days, we stopped at 4 different Hawaiian islands, and then toward the end of the cruise, we spent an entire day in Honolulu, Hawaii. And while we were there in Honolulu, I took a tour of a battleship that's anchored there at Pearl Harbor. It's the USS Missouri. And the Missouri is really an important part of history because it was on the deck of this battleship that World War II officially ended. This was where the Japanese signed an agreement of surrender. Here's a picture of me on board the USS Missouri taking that tour. So I spent 7 days on a cruise ship, spent a few hours on a battleship, and I was struck with the contrast between those two things. Like when I was on the cruise ship, here were some of the questions that I was asking. Am I comfortable? Are my needs being met? Do I like the entertainment? Is the staff friendly? Would I sail on Norwegian cruise lines again? You know, you approach it from a very me-centered mindset. But as I was standing on the deck of that battleship, I tried to imagine being a sailor in World War II and going off to war and wondering what would happen. And I think there would be a different set of questions going through my mind if I were on a battleship, like what is our mission? And what is my role in that mission? And who is counting on me? And what will I sacrifice? What will I be called upon to sacrifice for the sake of the mission, because see, a cruise ship and a battleship are two very different things. They're very different. On a cruise ship, the focus is on me, and so I have a sense of entitlement. On a battleship, the focus is on the mission, so I have a sense of responsibility. And when you sign up to be a passenger on a cruise ship, they call you a passenger. And when you sign up to travel on a cruise ship, they call you a crew member. And here's what I believe. I believe that the church, when it is functioning as God intended for it to function, that the church ought to look a whole lot more like a battleship than a cruise ship. In fact, this is what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 16. He said, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. He's describing the church being on the offense, knocking down the very gates of hell. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know how that strikes you, but that sounds to me a whole lot more like a battleship than a cruise ship. So this is us. This is our hope. This is our goal, that we want to be a church that's filled with people who see themselves as crew members and not just passengers, because we can never be the church that God is calling us to be, and we can never be the church that northeastern Pennsylvania needs us to be if we all just live with the mindset of a passenger. So we're going to talk today about what it means to be a crew member. And around here, we always begin by focusing our thoughts on a passage of Scripture to see what the Bible, God's Word, has to say to us. So today I want to draw your attention to the book of Romans and chapter 12. And we call it a book of the Bible. It was actually a letter written in the first century to Christians. And these were Christians specifically living in the city of Rome. And so it's called the letter or the epistle to the Romans. It was written by the Apostle Paul, who was a leader in the early church. And as I walk through and talk through 8 verses here from Romans chapter 12, I just want to give you 3 words that we can hang our thoughts on, and I think these 3 words will help us to move from being passengers to being crew members. And so the first word is this. The first word is gratitude, because this speaks to the motivation behind serving God and serving other people. And there are a lot of different things that can motivate us, right? We can be motivated by fear. We can be motivated by guilt. We can be motivated simply by religious duty. But I think the clearest and the most powerful and the longest lasting motivation there is deep and authentic gratitude. That's why verse 1, Romans chapter 12, begins this way. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy. And let me just stop right there before I continue reading. And I'll point out again that whenever you see the word therefore, it's a very important word. You need to pause, because the word therefore in the Bible always connects what has already been said with what is about to be said. And so here in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, this verse follows 11 chapters of the clearest and deepest teaching anywhere in the Bible about what God has done for me. The first 11 chapters of Romans tell me that I was lost, and I was far from God because of my own sin and my own rebellion. But God, in His love, in His mercy, stepped into human history in the form of His Son. He left heaven, came to earth, lived a simple life, died a brutal death. And because of the cross and the empty tomb, I can be forgiven and accepted, and I can become a part of God's family, and hell is shunned, and heaven is gained. And all of that is described in the first 11 chapters. Then you get to chapter 12, verse 1, and it says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy. This is a statement of gratitude. Now, here's the point. We are motivated to serve other people, because if we are followers of Christ, we have been on the receiving end of the greatest act of servanthood that history has ever seen. That we have been rescued from sin and shame and guilt because someone else took our place. And because of that mercy that we have received, it then goes on to say this: offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Now, the Apostle Paul, who wrote this letter, came from a Jewish background. And so he speaks from that background, and he's describing here the Jewish system of sacrifice, whereby someone would take their most valuable animal and they would bring it as an offering. They would sacrifice it to God. And Paul says, with that image in mind, sacrifice Not just the body of an animal, as in the Jewish worship system, but sacrifice your own body as a living sacrifice. Which means, by the way, not just your physical being, but the totality of who I am. My time and my talents and my energy and my passions. I just take all of that and I lay it down and I say, here, God, in view of your mercy, this is all yours. And he goes on to say this is your true and proper worship. Because when we think of worship, we think of an hour a week. We think of sitting in a building. We think of singing songs, which I love. I love that part of our gathering. But worship is so much more than that. It's all of who I am given over to God. And it's all driven by this. It's driven by gratitude in view of God's mercy. So the first key word is gratitude. The second key word is this, attitude. And here's what I mean by that. Driven by our gratitude for God's mercy toward us, we then need to shift our attitude. If we're going to move from being passengers to being crew members, we have to change the way that we think about life and about what really matters. It goes on to say this. In verse 2, it says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. In other words, Paul, as he writes this letter, he says, listen, don't think the way that everybody else around you thinks. Don't allow your attitude to be shaped by the values of this culture. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. And what is the pattern of this world? Well, very simply, the pattern of this world is to be self-centered, to make my life all about me. It's all about my plans and my dreams and my hopes and my preferences. The message we hear every day from every television ad, from every newspaper and magazine ad, from every pop-up ad when you're online is this: you need this thing, buy this thing, pursue this thing, experience this thing, because life is all about you. You're a consumer, not a contributor. And Paul says, listen, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world. You got to renew your mind. You've got to change your attitude. You've got to change your thinking. And then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is for your life, what he's calling you to do, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And then you keep reading in verse 3, and it gets very, very specific about how we need to change our attitudes. He goes on to say this, for by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think... Change of attitude. Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think, renew your mind, change of attitude. Think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought to. Paul was, I think, addressing a problem among the Christians there in the city of Rome, that some of them began to think they were better than other people. They began to have this sense of inflated pride, thought more of themselves than they should have, and probably it kept them from being willing to humbly serve one another. A few years ago, I came across a great story about a guy who thought a little bit too highly of himself. It's a true story about a guy named Bill Bradley. He was a U.S. senator. He was actually running for president at the time, and here's what happened. Bradley was invited to make a speech at a banquet and was sitting at the head table waiting for his turn to speak. When the waiter came over at one point and put a pat of butter on his plate, Bradley stopped him. "Excuse me," he said, "can I have 2 pats of butter?" "Sorry," said the waiter, "1 per person." "I don't think you know who I am," said Bradley. "I'm Bill Bradley, the U.S. Senator, the former basketball player, a presidential candidate." "Well, maybe you don't know who I am," said the waiter. "As a matter of fact, I don't," admitted the senator. "Who are you?" The waiter said, "I'm the guy who's in charge of the butter." Sometimes we just need that, don't we? We just need somebody to put us in our place, because we all have this tendency, not just politicians, but all of us, to think of ourselves more highly than we ought to. Don't you know who I am? Don't you know how busy I am? You expect me to serve other people? You want me to work with kids? You want me to park cars in a parking lot? I mean, don't you know who I am? We can get this overinflated sense of self-importance, and that's why we need a change of attitude, not to follow the pattern of this world. Because listen, we all want to be great, but I think sometimes we need to redefine what greatness looks like. Because here's what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 20. He said, whoever wants to become great among you must be your, what's the next word? servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give. Those two words, serve and give, really define the life and the work of Jesus. He came to serve and to give. Therefore, if we are followers of Christ, our life mission is to serve and to give. He came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. That's a change in attitude. Gratitude. We need to have hearts filled with gratitude that motivate us to reciprocate the mercy that God has given to us. And then we need to have a change of attitude. We need to think differently than this world would tell us to think. And then the third key word is this word. It's the word aptitude, which really means ability. But ability didn't rhyme with gratitude and attitude. So I had to go gratitude, attitude, aptitude. Okay? You move from being a passenger to being a crew member when you recognize that you have certain aptitudes, certain abilities that God has entrusted to you to play a part in the work that he wants to do through you in this world. See, maybe for you, your problem is not that you think too highly of yourself, that you think more highly of yourself than you ought to. Maybe for you, you don't think of yourself very highly at all, and you think, well, who am I? I have nothing to offer. And if you've ever thought that way, listen to the next few verses. It goes on to say this, verse 4, for just as each one of us has one body, and it's talking about our physical, literal bodies, one body with many members or parts or organs, and these members do not all have the same function, like your ear does something different than your toe, which is different from your elbow, all have different functions. So in Christ, we, believers gathered together in the church, we, though many, form one body, and each member part belongs to all the others. And so Paul, as he's writing this letter, he uses this beautiful, powerful word picture of the human body to describe how we, God's people, ought to function together. And the human body is an amazing thing. It is so complex, with organs and tissues and nerves and blood vessels and all of those things working in this beautiful symphony so that you can live and breathe and work and play. It's an amazing thing. But here's the truth. When one part, just one part of your body is not functioning the way it should, it can affect the rest of your body entirely. Isn't that true? I was reading this week about an NFL player, Justin Evans. He plays for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's a really good football player. He's a short safety. He was a second-round draft pick in 2017. But right now, he's not playing football. He's on the bench because of an injury. And his injury is what's called turf toe. Do you know what turf toe is? It's when you hyperextend your big toe and you sprain the joint. And it literally then can keep you from running. So you've got this muscular, talented young football player whose toe literally is keeping him on the bench. His toe. In fact, he was interviewed and he said this. He said, that was the most disappointing thing for me. Not being able to play when the rest of your body feels great and you've just got one of your toes keeping you on the bench. That's the human body, right? There's this interconnectedness and this interdependence to the point where even one part of your body isn't functioning. It can affect the rest of your body. And the Apostle Paul, as he writes this, he's trying to help us see that that is true about what's called the body of Christ, the church, that every part is important. And when even one part is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, we all feel it together, don't we? So maybe the big takeaway for the message is simply this: don't be the turf toe in the body of Christ, okay? Maybe it's just that simple. But he goes on here, verse 6. He says, we have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. In other words, we all have different gifts, something different to offer. We all have a part to play in what God wants to do in this world. God has given you a unique personality. He's put in your heart a unique set of passions. He's given you a particular set of life experiences. And all of those things make you who you are. And all of those things can be used in sometimes powerful ways to make a difference in this world. But we all have something to offer. We all have certain gifts. And actually, this is speaking about something called spiritual gifts, which are God-given spiritual capacities to do spiritual work. And it goes on to give a list of some of those. If your gift is prophesying, which means just speaking truth, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If your gift is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, then do it cheerfully. In other words, you've been created by God and called by God to play a part in the work of God, and He's gifted you in some way. Whatever He's given to you, whatever gift He's given to you, leverage it, use it. And maybe you're still trying to figure all of that out. Maybe you don't know what it is you can best do. And if you want to try to get some help figuring out how you're wired, let me give you a couple of resources. If you go on our website, there's what we call a spiritual gifts test. And you just answer a few questions. It takes about 15 minutes, and that will tell you a lot about what you may be able to contribute to this world. Just go to parkerhill.org/serve. And then probably the best teaching I've ever heard on this subject is by Chip Ingram. It's called Your Divine Design. And you can watch this video teaching series on Right Now Media. If you're a part of Parker Hill, you get a membership to Right Now Media just by being a part of this church. So take advantage of some resources like those and maybe others to figure out who you are. How have you been gifted? And then the bottom line is to take whatever gift you have and begin to actually use it. Don't waste it. I was thinking about gifts, and I was reading an article this past week on gift cards. Gift cards are now one of the most popular ways of gift giving. But I was surprised as I was reading this article. I was surprised how many gift cards never get used. Like, listen to this. The typical American family has $300 in unused gift cards. In that drawer at the back, in that coat pocket, in the birthday card that you filed away and forgot the gift card was in there. $300, typical American household. So you're going to go home now and start rooting through everything to find your unused gift cards, right? Listen to this, though. This is staggering to me. In the U.S., there are $45.7 billion in unused gift card balances. $45 billion just floating around out there on gift cards, not being used. A large chunk of which will never be used because the gift cards get lost or accidentally thrown away. I mean, that's mind-blowing to me. What's even more mind-blowing to me is the gifts that God has put into the hands of His people that never get used for anything of eternal value. They just get tucked away or squandered on personal pursuits, but never used for the reason that God has given us those gifts as followers of Christ, which is to advance His kingdom. So whatever gift God has given to you, use it. There is a part for you to play. Now, let me say this. Maybe you're at a point in your life where you're just kind of healing from some deep hurts, and you just need to come to church and you need to find that healing. Or maybe you're facing some challenges in your life right now that are very complicated, that are really consuming. Or maybe you're brand new to this church and you're not even sure this is a place that you want to call home. And I get that. And if you need time to heal, that's what we're here for. We'll help that. If your life is complicated right now and you just need some help, we'll come alongside you. If you're not even sure if this is a church for you, we'll help you figure that out. In fact, you can come to an event today called Next. But eventually, our goal is this: for everybody who considers this their church, for you to get off the sidelines and into the game, to move from being a passenger to being a crew member. Because here are a couple of things that will happen. Number one, what happens when we move from passengers to crew members? Number one, obviously, the mission will be accomplished. And I believe if you look across history, any great mission, any great accomplishment was the result not of individual effort, but of team effort, of many people moving in the same direction and using whatever gifts they have to make something significant happen. I'll give you one example. A couple of months ago, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, the first time a human being ever set foot on the surface of the moon. That really was an amazing, amazing accomplishment, especially in 1969. That rocket had less computer power on it than you have on the phone that you carry around every day. I mean, that was an amazing accomplishment. Now, I want to test your knowledge of history, okay? Let's see how you do. Turn to somebody next to you and see if you can name the 3 crew members that were a part of that mission, okay? Just turn to somebody next to you, see how many of their names you can get. Go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, okay, there's a pretty good buzz here in the room at the 11:15 service. It was crickets at 9:30. Like, you guys are the ones who are really good at history, I guess. Let me help you out. Neil Armstrong, he's probably the best known of the crew members. Then there was Buzz Aldrin. He was the other astronaut who also walked on the moon with Neil Armstrong. And then if you're really a history lover, you might remember the name of the astronaut who actually piloted Apollo 11. His name was Michael Collins, okay? But there were many, many, many more people that were needed to make that mission possible, people whose names we will never know. Engineers, computer scientists, financial analysts, bookkeepers, seamstresses, factory workers. In fact, I'm going to ask you to guess something else. I'm going to ask you to guess the total number of people involved in the Apollo 11 moon landing. Turn to somebody next to you. Guess how many other people worked on that project and brought that to reality. Go ahead, just throw a number out there. All right, let me help you out here. In addition to the 3-man crew, 218,000 other people were involved in designing, building, and managing the Apollo 11 moon landing. 218,000 people, none of whom will ever be famous, but every single one of whom was critical to the mission. So the greatest accomplishments are accomplishments that are made by teams of people who are willing to play their part in a greater mission. And we as a church, we've been given the greatest mission history has ever seen. Our mission is to help people find the way back to God, to bring a message of hope to people and reconnect them to their Creator. And so what we're talking about today is not getting you to volunteer for something. This is not about filling slots. This is not about you being on a list. It's about all of us being on mission. And so if you're out in the parking lot and you serve out there, it's not just about getting big chunks of metal and fiberglass between yellow lines on black pavement. That's about making people feel at home before they ever walk in this building, because so many people who come here have been away from church for so long. If you work in our kids ministry, that's not about babysitting. That's about planting the anchor of biblical truth deep in the heart of a child that will hold them steady for years to come. That's a part of a bigger mission. The guys in the back in the tech booth, that's not just about pushing buttons or turning dials. That's about helping us to create an engaging environment where people can hear the truth in a way that is relevant to their lives and that captures their attention. It is all part of the mission. And when you serve, you contribute to something much greater than yourself. You contribute to history's greatest mission being accomplished. But here's the second thing that'll happen. My life will be changed. See, you may not believe this, but when we ask you to serve, it's not just asking you to do something for someone else. We are inviting you to do something for yourself. Because here's what I've observed over many, many years, that when people begin to get outside of themselves, when they begin to serve others, when they begin to take the gifts that they have been given and use them to make an eternal difference, something happens in our hearts. And we discover community and relationships, and we just discover meaning and purpose when we become part of something beyond ourselves. I think the opposite is true as well. When we're not serving others, when we're just living life for ourselves, our hearts become stagnant, and we become critical and unfulfilled and inwardly focused. You know, there's a body of water over in Israel called the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea because nothing can live in that water. It has a very high salt content, very high mineral content. It's fun to swim in. I've actually gone swimming in the Dead Sea because it's 9 times more buoyant than normal water. So you can just lay there like on the very surface of the water. It's really cool. But the Dead Sea takes water in from the Jordan River. but it has no outlet. The only way water leaves the Dead Sea is through evaporation. And the Dead Sea is dead because it takes in but never gives out. And listen, when all you do is take in and take in and take in, but never give out and serve other people, the same thing happens. We become dead. Our hearts begin to stink. We become stagnant. So 2 things will happen. The mission will be accomplished. My life will be changed when I move from being a passenger to being a crew member. Now, in closing, let me speak to 3 groups of people. The first group I want to speak to would be those of you who are already serving in some capacity. And to you, I just want to say a big thank you. I mean, if I had the time, I'd love to sit down with every single one of you across a table with a cup of coffee and just tell you how much I appreciate the fact that you serve here as part of our crew. Because humanly speaking, without you, we could never have made the amazing impact that we have made here in northeastern Pennsylvania. I think of people like Jenny, who sits back in there. Jenny shows up midweek, and she vacuums the hallways, and she cleans up the trash, and she makes sure this building is fresh and clean and ready for people to arrive on Sunday. I think of Tammy. Tammy was up here on the platform. Tammy practices so that she can stand up here and use her gift of being a vocalist to draw us to the heart of God and connect with His truth at an emotional level. I think of Melissa, who sits back here. Melissa has some significant physical challenges, but she comes to the office every week to help with some of the office work, and she writes what we call app notes, which are a daily devotional that we email out to hundreds of people every week. I think of people like Ben. Ben sits over here. Ben is a small group leader with middle school boys on Wednesday night. He is a hero in my book. Middle school boys, small group leader, walking alongside them through life. I mean, without people like that, this place would not be a place where people could find the way back to God. In fact, everybody right now, let's just thank all of the folks who are part of our crew. Big thank you. Second group I want to speak to is those of you who are already serving, but maybe you have more capacity for leadership. And maybe you could take a step up and lead a team or begin to teach and take on some leadership role as a crew member. And we'd love to help you do that. We'll fill the position you're currently in. We'll even give you some leadership training to benefit you, not just here in church, but in your place of work, in your home, all of that. Third group, those of you who are not yet serving, and if God is prompting you to take that step, don't ignore that prompting. I believe none of us can be the people we're called to be when we only live for ourselves. Until we actually take what God has given to us and begin to use it for His kingdom, we'll never be the people that He's calling us to be. So let me give you a very simple process to move from being a passenger to being a crew member. When you leave this room, right out there behind that wall, there's a board that says Say Yes to Serving, and there are some cards on that board listing some of the opportunities available. Look at that board, scan the opportunities, find one that really piques your interest, take the card, turn it over, and fill out your name on that, and then hand it to somebody there at the Next Steps area. That's not signing on the dotted line. That's not making a commitment. That's starting a conversation. And what we'll do is we'll arrange for you to do a preview in the area where you may be interested in serving to see if it is a good fit for you. Again, this is not about filling slots or getting people on a list. This is about a mission that's important than any one of us individually, and it's about our spiritual growth. Okay, so I began today by talking about a cruise ship and a battleship. I want to end today by talking about a much smaller boat called a shell. A shell is a racing boat that looks like a long, skinny canoe. And the people who row in a shell are literally called crew. And if you've ever seen a crew team compete, you know it's fascinating to watch. It's fascinating to watch the synchronization, the teamwork, the movement as they glide through the water. It's really a beautiful thing. And I've often thought that's a great image of what the church ought to be. A bunch of people all moving in the same direction, listening to the same voice, playing their part. We have a young man named Alex who's a part of this church, and when he was in college at the University of Scranton, he was a part of their crew team. We interviewed him a few years ago about that experience, and I just want to let you hear from him by way of video. And then after you hear that, Paul McGinnis is going to come back up, so stick around. We're just going to honor one of our awesome crew members on this campus. We're going to have fun with that, so don't go anywhere. For right now, watch this with me.
So rowing is the definition of a team sport. I'm Alex Thomas. I'm a junior at the University of Scranton and a member of the men's crew team. The individual glory is gone the day you try out for this team. No one really has a free ride. It's really a commitment. You're here for a reason. Boats are divided up into 2, 4, or 8-person boats, and then the 4 and 8-person have a coxswain in them that steers them. The rowers actually have no clue where they're going because they're facing backwards, so all the trust is on that person to point us in the right direction. We're all working toward the same goal of propelling the boat through the water the best way we can. I would say the feeling of everyone being in sync with each other is a euphoric feeling because you really just feel like you're part of a machine. You're part of a team that's all working together towards the same goal. It feels like a work of art. You can't really tell when a stroke's being taken and when it's not, just kind of gliding along. When it's not, you could definitely tell it's called a check, and it's a jerking motion where you get a lot of lower back pain because you're being thrown backwards like whiplash. That feeling is very unsettling. It's very frustrating too because you might be the problem, but you're still putting that effort in. You might not know that you're the problem in it, but you could still feel that something's not right with it. It's not just working harder, it's working smarter. Learning from your mistakes, different motions that you can improve, different speeds that you can roll up on, and really listening to constructive criticism. Every single person in this boat matters. We all have a job, we all have a duty to serve. If 7 of the 8 people show up, that's great, but you're not rowing that morning. Rowing in a sport really comes down to personal commitment. You're the one setting the alarm the night before to wake up at 5 in the morning to get all your things ready the night before because you know those other people are doing the same thing. You know the person in front of you is willing to give everything that they have to get to that finish line before your opponent does. So you're doing it for yourself, but you're also doing it for the benefit of the team itself. You're putting in the hours, you're going to practice, and you're doing it for yourself and for the guy in front and back of you. It's humbled me in a way. It knocked my pride down, really taught me it's all about others. You know, it's not about myself. I think the most important thing someone can do in this life is to humble themselves and say, hey, it's not all about me. Let's see what I can do for that person over there. This sport in general has taught me just obedience and dedication, teamwork. Everyone here is doing work. We're not passengers. No one gets a free ride in the boat. You know, we're all here giving it our all.